Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's webinar, Enabling Contact Center Recording Natively in Microsoft Teams. We will provide you with a closer look at how Enghouse delivers native customer interaction recording in Microsoft Teams, as well as the latest enhancements to our Enghouse Quality Management Suite. I would like to introduce Carl Townley-Taylor, Product Manager at Enghouse Interactive, who will be leading today's presentation. Hello, Carl. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Carl. My name is Astrid Pocklington. I'm a marketing manager at Enghouse Interactive, and I will be your host for today's session. Let me start off with a few housekeeping announcements. This webinar will be recorded and made available to you afterwards via email. And as part of our follow-up, we will also be sending you a copy of our new guide, the Connected Contact Center, Native Integration with Microsoft Teams. You can ask questions during the webinar. And for those of you that are not yet familiar with GoToWebinar, I will quickly show you how to do that. All you need to do is click on the little orange button with the white arrow to expand the control panel. Then you scroll down to the questions section, type in your question and hit send. And we will allow plenty of time for your questions at the end of the webinar. Right, and without further ado, I will hand over to Carl for our main presentation.
Great, thank you. Just great. Thank you, Astrid. So yeah, you should all be able to see my slide deck now. So yeah, welcome everybody. What I'm going to do is run through how our Enghouse call recording platform records calls within Teams. There's 3 different ways of doing that, and they all have their pros and cons to each. And then, being the product manager, I'll go through the vision of the product over the next 6 months, and then to try and break this up a little bit so there isn't too many slides, we've got a couple of questions in there to get some feedback from yourselves, and then a demonstration of the product as well at the end. So with that then, why we find what are the main business drivers of our customers that are looking at quality management or call recording, and really there's just a handful of reasons. We've got the main one being security and compliance, where we're recording the bulk of interactions for a retention policy that needs to last over many years or 6 months. The idea is we're recording everything for the if, buts, or maybes, the eventuality where we might need to be looking back on that content. QMS has, in theory, an indefinite amount of time that we can retain those calls for. The only consideration is disk space. In the same category, we've got compliance, where we may be recording those contact center interactions where the agent could potentially be taking a payment, and so we need to be able to either prevent that data being captured in the recording, and we do that by pausing the capture method during the interaction, or we redact the content after the fact. So either we use the APIs or an endpoint client to be able to allow the agents to automatically pause that call or manually pause that call, or we're using a third-party product that's going to be taking that transcription and redacting that content after the event. Secondly, to those reasons, we've got these other 3, which sort of all link to each other: training and evaluation, customer satisfaction, and productivity, where we're recording all of that content and then we're using it as a way of training our staff, improving customer satisfaction by training our staff, and ultimately, again, training always feeds back into productivity if we're able to find out ways of improving our processes by reviewing them after they've been captured. So what makes QMS or Enghouse call recording platform secure? We're able to encrypt all of the content, so it doesn't necessarily have to sit at rest in the standard format that it's captured in. We can encrypt everything, and so should somebody have access to the backend topology, those files don't have any any meaning. They won't work outside of the platform. Those keys that are used to encrypt the content, they're also used to decrypt it. So the idea is that you'll have two key individuals that would hold these keys in a safe location should they ever need to export content for an external party to have access to. Rights-based access to the platform is key. So we have security profiles to make sure that users only have access to the tasks and the recordings that are relevant to their use case. For example, an agent is going to have access to play back their own recordings and not be able to make any configuration changes, versus a supervisor that could manage their department and have access to their own specific department to play back recordings, all the way up to, say, an IT administrator that has access to do everything but not necessarily play back recordings for GDPR reasons. The main ways that we're meeting those compliance requirements, as I mentioned earlier, is being able to automatically pause the recording. The ideal scenario would be to remove the agent from the payment process altogether using a PCI gateway. Not all customers do that. They're still relying on agents to take those payments. And in those scenarios, we want to make sure that we're not recording that part of the interaction. And so what we do is we use the URL of the payment gateway as a trigger, and that trigger is then automatically pausing the recording for that user. And then when they move away from the payment gateway, or the URL changes, thus the trigger changes, and it resumes recording when we need to. That API is available for any of our other customers to integrate with. We've used it to automatically pause recordings, but we've had customers use it for their CRM platform to pause calls in a different way. We have an audit trail within QMS, so absolutely everything, every login event, every deletion, creation, playback is captured within QMS. When you search for a recording and you then view the content or play back the media, there'll always be an audit log underneath it to tell you who else has listened to this recording. And then compliance goes beyond just the user interface. It's where are those files being stored and who has access to those files. So you may have a recorder in Azure, for example, and files will be stored there for X amount of days and then moved off to a central location and then fall into the IT standard backup process. And that archive process could be the last 100 calls on a Saturday, it could be the last 15 gig every evening, but the point is it's flexible to whatever the business requirement is. So at that point, I think we'll just jump back to Astrid, as we know that the whole environment at the moment is migrating to Teams, and it's certainly the subject for today's call. And we're just interested in what telephony solution you were using before moving to Teams, and Astrid can take it from there.
Yes, thank you, Carl. As you pointed out, I would like to grab your attention for our first audience poll. So the question is, which telephony platform are you currently using or have been using previously before moving to Teams? The options are Skype, Cisco, Avaya, or other. So if you could please take your pick and vote. Yeah, we've got 70% of our audience have already voted. Let's give it a few more seconds. Okay, I think this is it. So I will be sharing the results with you. Carl, what do you make of this? Are you surprised by the result?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it's we had a webinar in the other regions, and it's very similar that just as many people that were on Skype were also on alternate PBXs moving to Teams. Cisco and Avaya seem to have retained customers better than we may have expected. But yeah, as we're all aware, there's a huge migration to Teams.
Yeah, it's still quite a large proportion of other where we obviously don't have the details.
Yep, it's certainly interesting that the majority were already Microsoft customers upgrading as you would think from Skype to Teams. So that's good. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so Before we move on to the three key ways that we can record the content, I said I wanted to give you the key features of the software as it currently stands. The latest release of the platform has been focused on these key topics. So single sign-on being a main one as part of recording within Teams. There's also this huge shift to moving everything into the cloud. It's not necessarily just recording calls via the Teams interface. It's about getting everything off-prem and into a central cloud provider. And as part of that, there's also been this shift to single sign-on. So within Enghouse, all of our products are integrating with what we call Keycloak, but it's just a gateway or a central point to allow all of our customers to use regardless of what single sign-on technology they choose to use. And it's certainly going to benefit customers that have multiple Enghouse products rather than having to remember lots of different passwords. You could still use Windows authentication if you choose to, but this is going to allow us to use SAML or any other multi-factor authentication that the customers may wish to use. We've added support for Azure speech-to-text transcription. In the past, we've slowly added vendors to the call recording platform, starting with Nuance, AWS, and then to keep it to this theme, today's theme, we've also Azure as a speech-to-text engine. And moving on to multi-channel recording, we can also now record the screen share within Microsoft Teams. So if you're having an internal call or a meeting through the Teams client, yes, we'll record the audio, but if you were to share your screen, we're also going to capture that now. And on the quality management side, we've been adding tools around the agent evaluation process to make it more of a workflow, and we can now add due dates to that, so you can distribute an agent evaluation to be completed by a member of staff, and you can put a due date on that so that it's not going to sit there for months on end not being completed. You can say, I need that done by the end of the week or the end of the day, just to keep that evaluation cycle moving. Still on the subject of everything moving to the cloud and compliance, the log files now are redacted of all sensitive information. So if there's a scenario where, for example, one of our partners or a customer needs to send log files to us, they can do that so with confidence that there's no sensitive information in there, such as customers' phone numbers, for example. Enghouse have their own video face-to-face interaction product called VidYO, and so not necessarily relevant to the audience today, but QMS can now record all the face-to-face interactions within there. We have a customizable splash screen for logins. The idea is when all of your users log into QMS, they'll get a message pop up. Now, when you upgrade, that message will contain all the latest features of the product, and there'll be a button there to say, do not display this again. But businesses could use that as a way of making sure that your staff are complying to GDPR, for example. You could have a message there that says, do not share content within here, and you have to make sure that they agree to those terms by ticking a button to then be able to progress into the platform. And again, this migration into the cloud, we're creating tools to make that process as seamless as possible. So for our engineers out there that are moving on-prem deployments to something like Azure, AWS, trying to make that process as quick and easy as possible with migration tools that will just package everything up and then distribute it to the destination. Looking forward then to the next release, which is coming out the first thing next year, we're able to use AWS to translate those transcriptions. Currently, all calls are transcribed in the language that they were recorded in. But for agent evaluation, we've had customers that need to take those transcriptions and convert them to a different language because the QA team don't speak the same language as the agents. And so what we can do now is allow the agents to continue their interactions as they normally would. They're going to get a copy of that transcription that they can then distribute to customers or use for QA. And we can also then take that text and translate it to whatever language we need. Still on that continuous drive to move things into a more hosted scenario, Enghouse have their own hosted contact center called CCAS, and the call recording solution for that will be QMS, and so the integration with that has become key, allowing us to have a full multi-tenant call recording platform that Enghouse can offer as a service, similar to how our partners can. And still on that drive to move things into a hosted environment means that cost of ownership becomes even more of a concern or a focus. And so there's this drive at the moment within the product to move to a containerized topology. So at the moment, QMS, and traditionally it's always been a Windows platform, that will be changing by the end of the next year to a more of a containerized topology, allowing us to have a smaller footprint, spin up containers faster than we currently can with VMs, allowing us to scale faster. And again, the benefits of that will of course be seen within Enghouse is offering, but it's something that will also then be shared with all the partners and customers. Again, that continuous drive to reduce the cost of ownership of the platform. Email notification changed with Gmail. That's just a quick note that supporting OAuth for Gmail, and then still on that drive to offer it as a service, there'll be an additional tenant usage report added to the product in 9.2. And then slightly further on, keeping it focused on the subject for today around Microsoft and Teams, the roadmap, as you can see, it is focused on strengthening out the relationship that we have with our partners and Microsoft. So Microsoft Teams certification is something that's currently in process. Yes, we already recorded Teams through the Graph API, and we have a strong relationship with Microsoft across all of our portfolio. And the certification is something that's currently in progress just to get that final stamp. I mentioned translation through AWS. Vendors are done one at a time, so the next one will be Azure, allowing us to provide the same feature set. Transcription already is something we can do in Azure, and then translation of those transcriptions will be next. And then the more and more data we're putting into QMS around agent evaluation, recordings, contact center integration, the more reporting capabilities we're going to need. And so those are slowly being added to the product as well. Of course, cost of ownership and lowering it the best we can will always be on the roadmap.
Right, time for our next audience poll. So this time we would like to know, what call recording requirements do you have within your business? A, just for contact center only, B, for contact center and back office, or for non-contact center users. So if you could please cast your vote. Okay, it keeps changing quite a bit. Interesting. I just give it a few more moments to allow everybody to make their choice. Okay, let's close the vote and look at the results. What do you make of that, Carl? Contact center only was well ahead, and then things have changed last minute.
I think that because that's what we see normally is you think, well, all of our customers are speaking to our contact center agents, and so they're the ones we want to record. But then it's what happens if the contact center agent transfers a call internally. We want to continue recording that agent journey, that customer journey, and so more often than not, it's both. It's no surprise from our experience as well that we're not necessarily interested, or businesses aren't interested in recording internal calls between members of staff. It just doesn't seem to be something that's done with our standard customer base. It's more external customer interactions into the business. So that's exactly what we'd expect. It's good.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then that, what we've just seen from that poll from Astrid, that will feed in to the next few slides around how we're actually recording those calls, because you'll see that it all has a knock-on effect on what type of interactions you're trying to record. One last slide just to go through the future of the product. So again, we're, like I mentioned, we are moving QMS into a more of a containerized topology. Again, that just continuous drive to reduce the cost of ownership still, and then as you can see, the focus on strengthening that Microsoft relationship. So recording the camera hasn't been a focus because it's not something that we've been needing to from our customers, but as we move into the contact center, being more Teams focused, it will be something that we're adding as well in the call recording, and then being able to just have compliance recording as a button within Teams rather than having to use a separate application or a web page, being able to allow your agents to stop, start, pause recording as we currently can with a desktop agent, but within Teams, just trying to build it more of a focused tool around the Microsoft story. So then the title of this webinar, how we're recording calls in a Microsoft Teams environment. We have 3 ways of doing it, as I said, and they all have different caveats and they all have different benefits. Starting with the one that Microsoft advertises or recommends, that's through the Microsoft Graph API. So what we have here is our QMS server deployed in Azure as the prerequisite to be able to record calls in this way, integrated with the Microsoft platform via the Graph API. The benefit of doing this is we're going to record everything. PSTN calls that route through the session border control up to Azure are going to be subject to this Graph API, and we're going to be able to record those calls regardless of whether they go through a contact center or to the back office. Thinking back to Astrid's poll, if we were using Microsoft calling plans, again, regardless of whether they route through the contact center or to an end user in the back office, they're all subject to the Graph API, and so we're going to be able to record those calls. And then the third example, obviously, is if these 2 users were going to make an internal Teams to Teams call, again, it's all within the Microsoft stack, and so the Graph API is able to cater for that and record those calls. The benefits of this particular scenario, as you can see, is we're able to record everything. If you don't have a contact center for that 15% of people that tick that in that poll, then this is the recording method for you potentially, because we're going to be able to record everything. If you're a contact center user that wants to continue recording calls and that customer journey outside of the contact center to the back office, again, this is going to be good for you. The only consideration really is around the Azure costs, because the QMS server, the call recording server, has to reside within Azure, and therefore the storage costs, it's all within the platform, all within the Azure services. The alternative to this would be to use the contact center itself as a source of audio for all of your calls. So the benefits to this is if you're a customer that's not completely focused on moving everything into the cloud, maybe for security reasons you want to keep those recordings on-prem or in your own virtual environment, for example, if you don't want to even use Azure, you want to use AWS, whatever, this is going to give you the flexibility to put that server, reside it wherever you like. It's always my preference to keep it as close to the contact center as you can, because that's the source of the audio. But in this particular scenario, you're not forced to put it into Azure. The downside of this, or the con, is we are only going to record calls that route through the contact center. Thus, if you were to have a back office conversation between 2 members of staff, we're not going to record that, of course, because they're not contact center members of staff. If this contact center agent decides to make an outbound call via Teams and not the contact center client, we won't record that. And so by using the contact center as a source of audio, we're then limiting the recording capability to all calls that route through the contact center. That quite often is enough, because all inbound traffic that we're focused on is from our customers. That's going to route through the SBC or Microsoft calling plans through our contact center, and that's the interactions that we're most focused on. Likewise, if you have an outbound campaign in your contact center, that's still a contact center call outbound, and we'll record that. What we won't record is a customer speaks to an agent, that agent transfers the call to an internal member of staff. That's the end of it then. We're not going to continue recording that call. And then that gives us a third scenario again. So in this scenario, again, the benefit is we don't have to put QMS in Azure. If that is a benefit, I mean, if that's the direction that your business is going in, then it's a null issue. And what we're doing here is we're recording calls via SIPREC from the session border control. The pros of this is we're going to record all inbound and outbound PSTN calls. So this will cater for your back office scenario where your end users are making and receiving external calls. It won't cater for internal traffic because that's not going to route through the SBC, and it's not going to cater for customers that are using Microsoft calling plans because again, it's not going to route via the SBC. This is the source of the audio in this scenario, and so we're relying on any calls coming via the PSTN routing via the session border control to our contact center or to our users. But really what we've got there is 3 different methods of recording the call. All have zero cost as far as licensing is concerned. The only caveat is the hosting cost, regardless of whether that's Azure hosting cost or VM. And it's always a conversation then that we can have with the customer on what's best for you and what is it that you're trying to record.
Right. And for one last time, we would like to get your input. The question for our final poll is, what would be your main driver for Teams recording? Is it A, compliance, B, quality control, or C, dispute protection and resolution? Just waiting for people to take their pick. There's a neck on neck at the moment, so no clear winner. But let's take a look at the results. Wow. Who would have thought that? Carl, what do you think?
Well, I'm not sure that tells us much. Everybody's got exactly the same call recording requirements. You know, compliance. It's almost like they've been talking to each other and they've split it 33% all the way. That's I don't think I've ever seen that. That's good.
Yeah, surprising result.
Well, I guess the only message that we take away from that is that our call recording platform can cater for all 3 scenarios with the various different feature sets. So that's good to see.
Yeah, and all of them seem equally important to people. So if you can fulfill all their needs with one platform, then yeah, fantastic. They wouldn't have to compromise on compliance or quality control or dispute protection. So looks great.
Great. Okay, well, so thanks for your attention so far. I realize it's lots of slides and me talking, so I wanted to sort of try and break that up with a demonstration to try and just step away from slides the best that we can. So this is the call recording solution that we have within Enghouse called Quality Management. And as I mentioned earlier, generally customers are recording calls for one of 2 reasons: security and compliance. I would normally package the 2, or education, customer satisfaction, trying to improve services. And the way that we do the second part of that requirement is through a tool called agent evaluation. Now, agent evaluation within QMS starts life with a scorecard. Now, every scorecard is unique to the business, and so the product comes with a handful of default scorecards to give your customers an idea of what the end result is, rather than just a blank sheet of paper. Most customers have their own QA teams already that they can just import their scorecard in. So what we can see here is that this business is looking at a focus on how our agents are answering the calls. So we're focused on greeting. We're expecting our agents to say 4 things. They're greeting the customer, they're introducing the business, they're introducing themselves, and they're offering assistance to that member of staff or that customer through the contact center. In this particular scenario, we're asking 4 points from our agents, and so the way that we score this question is 0 to 4, with a weight of each being 1. Questions aren't necessarily as complicated as that. They might simply be yes and no. Did the agent do this? Did they offer this? Did they ask this, etc.? Yes or no. And so the question changes then to yes and no. These question types are configurable as well. Some businesses might have a score from 0 to 10, for example. We have a success and weight failure because not all questions are as important as each other. Thinking of the negative, you may decide that greeting the customer and saying that all calls are recorded for training monitoring purposes is the most important thing ever. And so if my agents don't do that, I can put a failure weight here of 100, and that's just going to overwrite any good that they've done within that call. It doesn't all have to be negative though. You may have something in here like, did my agent try and upsell the best they could, or did they offer the sales opportunity? And we can give additional points for that as well, just to try and keep the questions focused on the business drivers. Not every question is equal. Once we've built our scorecard, traditionally what we've had to do is our agents would come in here, our supervisors would search for a recording. Very quickly, you can do that. Identify the recording that we want to perform an evaluation on, and then I start an evaluation. I'm going to select the same scorecard that we were just looking at. We can see here we're answering the call with greeting, and then it's been the job of the supervisor to then listen to this audio, read the email, read the transcript between the chatbot and the agent, the customer, before it then reaches to the agent, etc., and go through here and answer these questions. We've always had the ability to take timestamps of the audio and drop it on here, because if you're using this as, say, an appraisal process throughout the year to then help for pay rises, for example, your agents are going to want to be able to come back here and see, well, you said no on this particular question, why? I'm going to click play and it will go me straight to that part of the recording. We would then click save, and we're finished with the agent evaluation. The reason why we do that is it then feeds into our reports. So I always say that these reports, they complement a contact center. They could go without, and you don't have to have media associated to these scorecards. You may have an internal process around CRM or any sort of other process that doesn't have something include an interaction recorded in the contact center. And so you could still use the agent evaluation tool without having to have a phone call or an email recorded. But as I say, with the contact center reports, they're going to be very statistical. How many calls have I taken? Have I hit my SLA? My agents had X amount of breaks, and what breaks have they been taking? What has my grade of service been? But what we can do with these are our training requirements. So using the same scorecard, I can see here that if we had a contact center in the mix, I may be hitting my SLA 100% of the time. We're amazing. We're answering all calls within 15 seconds as we advertise to our customers. However, looking at this, the customer experience isn't represented very well by that SLA number, because I can see here that my agents are not answering the call as I want them to. They're not offering this particular sales opportunity. They're not showing the empathy of when they put people on hold. So this is going to highlight the training requirements that I need to then take back to improve my workforce and thus customer satisfaction. The problem with this feature has always been the time it takes to perform that agent evaluation, though. If the call is 40 minutes, it's going to take our poor supervisor 40 minutes to evaluate that call. And so there's a focus on this moving forward, starting with this new feature called Agent Evaluation Workflow. And it's going to take that process that you've just seen and try and put a workflow around it. An example of that might be a business decides to have this sort of workflow where we can allow our agents to evaluate themselves, not necessarily agent A evaluating agent A, but we could have agent A evaluating agent B. My supervisor then, their workload's decreased. And the reason why we're able to allow them to have this self-evaluation mentality is because we're able to notify the agent that they've been evaluated and give them the ability to dispute it or approve it. So one of my peers has evaluated me. I've been notified through the application that I've been evaluated, and I can look at that, review it. If I agree with it, then it moves into the reports. If I disagree with it, at that point, my supervisor who used to do this role is now just an escalation point for these disputes. and then the supervisor is then notified, looks at the evaluation, makes any changes that may need to be done, and then it then feeds into our reporting data. This is just one example. We may continue to have our supervisor perform that role, but our agents are now able to dispute it, in which case it would go to a different member of staff. You might have a QA team, and within that QA team, you've got multiple escalation points. And so there's going to be a focus around here of improving this as well. What this allows us to do is automatically associate media to it as well based on these profiles. So rather than having to search for a recording, the user instead will just go to create an evaluation, and then media is automatically associated to them. And what that allows us to do is only evaluate calls that have gone through a particular queue, only evaluate calls that were inbound, only evaluate calls where an agent transferred the call to an internal destination, rather than having to exposing our supervisors to potentially evaluate everything that isn't necessarily relevant to the business process that we're trying to monitor. And so that supervisor that was only able to do 1 or 2 evaluations a week, depending on if they wanted to do this for self-evaluation, you could then have your agents all perform an evaluation a week or a day or every other day, and it's just going to then increase those evaluations. More evaluations you do, the better the statistical reporting is going to be. And that really is it. I want to just open it up to questions. We've got plenty of time. If anybody wanted to ask anything or put it in the chat, if you had any questions, then please let us know. And sorry, over to you, Astrid.
Thank you, Carl. That was a fantastic presentation. Let's see if that left our listeners with any open questions. Not many, which hopefully is a good sign, because you answered all their questions in your presentation. One listener would like to know what the licensing models are that we have available.
Yeah, so we're similar to how we offer the QMS platform as a service or as an on-prem deployment. We have multiple different ways of licensing it. If you want a perpetual license as a customer, or if you want to be able to offer it as a subscription, then that's all within the product. We can also do user-based or concurrent licensing as well. So rather than having a license associated to a user, we can limit the recorder to a concurrent usage. So for customers looking to record both contact center and back office, what we would recommend is a pool of user-based licenses for the contact center. That way we're guaranteed to record everything. And then to keep the cost down, we have a pool of concurrent licenses for everybody else in the business, because we only want to record that particular scenario. So we can mix and match licenses to keep, again, that cost of ownership down as best we can.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Carl. Next question, does QMS support automated rating of calls through AI and automated alignment to a script?
Yes, it does. Yes, we have we have 2 different AI engines within Enghouse. One will help automate the agent evaluation process completely, or we have a different tool where the recording is sent to an AI engine in real time that then feeds back to the agent for script adherence. So the agent will have a tool on their screen, and it will prompt them to say, "You've not introduced yourself to the customer," and then it will recognize that that greeting has been performed in real time and tick, and then the next one. So your agents are given a script adherence, and in real time, QMS is then helping to make sure that agent is sticking to that script. So yes to both.
Okay, thank you. And if you could remind us again of the upcoming release date for QMS.
So the next release of QMS 9.2 is due end of January 2023. Obviously, everybody's got Christmas and New Year between now and then, so I've pushed it to the end of January to make sure it's a date we can commit to comfortably.
That sounds sensible. Carl, that was it. I don't have any further questions. So yeah, I would like to thank you for your interesting presentation and the product demonstration, and also thank our audience for joining us today. I hope you found it worthwhile. Have a wonderful Christmas and a happy and healthy New Year. Goodbye from me.
Thank you, everyone.